Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Diving Deeper with Meaningful Connections. My name is Dr. Jay Pugh. For this webinar, I normally don't request that people necessarily hop on the cameras or things like that, but if you do want to join me for this one, we're going to go through a couple cool little exercises. So feel free to join me on camera if you choose to. I think it would be great to see some faces. And we're going to talk about how to do this, especially when we're working in this maybe hybrid workforce that we're facing. So just a little bit to get to know me as we dive in. My name's Jay Pugh. I'm our vice president for the Center for Leadership and Development with New Horizons. I do have a PhD in instructional management and leadership from Robert Morris University. I've been in this space for about 8 years now, and I've been teaching and training for about 16. So, hey, and good to see, put a name with a face. Hey, Ann, wonderful. See, and I love the smile there. That's awesome. And so I am a published author in this space, Conquering the 7 C's for better face-to-face and online teaching. So I live in the remote world. I live in sort of this connectivity scope that we're diving into. And I always say, if you get to know somebody, I am a hashtag girl dad. I have 4 daughters, 2 are biological and 2 are adopted. So that's why I try to keep the hair real short so that I am not running into any type of gray hairs because they're already forming. So in this case, it's just a little bit about me. I want to dive in and have some fun with you all. And so one of the first things I want to get you to think about is this. What does dialogue look like with an amazing leader of yours? How is that different in the way that maybe dialogue looked with a poor leader? What does that dialogue truly look like? Well, hey, Linda, there's Linda. Go ahead and type your responses in the chat. Oh, and here we go. So, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I always try to get names right. Is that Smita? I think that's a big one, that inspirational conversation. That's right. Wonderful. I love making sure we get names right. That's excellent. So I'm seeing open feedback. Clear is kind. I am a huge fan of Brene Brown, and I will agree with you entirely that clear is kind. I love that Smita said inspiring. There should be motivation behind it. Dialogue is uplifting. It's helpful. It's smooth. It almost feels comfortable, Nelsita. And I want to make sure that I'm saying that correctly. I love, Anne, you mentioned that they are engaged and connected to you as a person. I agree entirely on that. Asks for inputs and questions versus demand and ordering. I love that too. Inquisitive, not accusational. I love that, Kim. Encouraging, transparent. There's not a fear of negativity, repercussions of any kind. It is truly an honest and open dialogue. Wonderful responses, everybody. And I think you're spot on about this. And you're right, Nelsita, is that when we talk about poor leadership, the communication is never clear. The vision is not clear. The mission is not clear. And it almost feels like it's self-serving in those cases. So I would agree with that entirely. And feeling safe is key, and I think that's the key thing. There is a new concept going out there, and I wouldn't say it's new, but it's really been very popular over the last few years, and that is called psychological safety. We have to create a sense of psychological safety in the workplace with who we communicate with. And Lisa, I love what you just said with every time you asked a question, it was almost like it was a questioning of the person, not the topic. And that's an important thing too, is when the open leadership, I always say the great leaders allow for that opening of questions. They want that dialogue. They embrace that dialogue in the tough conversations. One of the key concepts I like to dive in first with this is that interpersonal awareness is the big thing here of what they demonstrate. They showcase a greater degree of self-awareness. They have this interactional awareness in the way that they really focus in on their approaches. And when they have that awareness of thinking or learning or even their own personality styles in the way they communicate, they almost have this sense of responsibility to self-regulate in those approaches. And Linda, I love how you said they have this power in not taking things personally. It isn't personal. It never is, because we're always looking towards future-focused dialogue. And so when we have this responsibility in our interactions, the way that I view it is this way: from a self-awareness standpoint, and I try to be open and transparent about my own approaches. I always say, and if anybody's ever seen me before, I am not the most fuzzy human being on the planet. I am not a there kind of person. I'm not a verbal hugger of sorts. That is not in my MO. Empathy is something I give, but my empathy looks more like, what can I do to clear something off your plate? Whereas there are other people that are really naturally, genuinely empathetic leaders. So for me, I know that if that is something that I lack in my own self-awareness, I have to make the shift. I have to know that in my own interpersonal interactions. So this interpersonal awareness is this recognition point of, what language am I speaking? And then am I also speaking that language to them as well? And are they receiving it the same way? So when we go into this, I always try to say that the difference between the great leadership and the poor leadership is the dynamic of what we call ego states. And this is transaction analysis. And when we talk about this, one of the kind of things that I go into is that the first dynamic that exists here is what we call parent-child mode. This is where there is a dynamic that exists that is focused much more in the space of somebody talking down to another person. There's a sense of condescension. There is this approach that one person has a power position over somebody else. Command is definitely centralized to the top. And what happens here is when that is the dynamic, it breeds fear, it breeds discomfort, it lacks ideas and vision. And so we have to be conscious of the way that we communicate. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be firm in our stances or that we can't focus on why something is the way that it is and being able to share that information. However, when we communicate this, we really have to go into adult to adult mode. We really have to take this adult to adult dynamic. We have to treat people equally regardless of position. So I always say that the conversations I have with the people above me, the people on the same level as me, and the people that work for me, whether it's a dotted line or direct, it is still the same adult to adult mode transaction analysis. It is always power in personality, power in dialogue. Those are all things that truly matter in those spaces. So what it really looks like is 4 major pieces of transactional analysis. The first one gets into control. Now, with all 4 of these, I want to say that adult roles share these things. Whereas when we talk about from a parent role, it's almost one demands it and the other one lacks it or shies away from it. So the first one's control. Whenever there's a parent-child relationship, the leader wants to have control. They must have control in these situations. And the child role will lack any control. They're like, I'm not getting my hands dirty with this one. I'm not going to do any of that. So the parent roles demand that control, which then enforces that the control is lacked or shied away from by the child or the employee in this case. Whereas adult roles share that control. They say it may be a divide and conquer approach to where, hey, I'm going to be responsible for this. You're going to be responsible for this, but we're going to make sure that are we both comfortable with that control there? It might be collaboration and control. That, hey, we're going to walk through this together. We're going to dive into this together. We'll go through this together. So control is one space. The next one is authority. Authority is controlled by both when adult roles share this information, which means that I am one authority member, but that doesn't mean my authority is the final end all be all to where what I say goes. No, it's what we say goes. It's how we approach. I always say that when it comes to authority, that the what and the why can be the same, which means that what we do for our organization and why we do it can be the exact same. However, how we get it done can be shared, it can be shifted, it can be approachable. The way that maybe Marissa does something looks different than the way that I do it, or the way that Brandy does something might look differently than the way I do it. For me, we are both authorities in the way that we approach. The third one is responsibility. And when we talk about responsibility, I'll be very candid here. With responsibility, parent roles demand that the child or that the employee, the leader and the employee, the leader demands that the employee takes responsibility, but they themselves might not do that. Whereas adult roles share responsibility. We are both responsible, and more important, we are both accountable to those areas. Whereas what happens in a parent-child mode in ego state transactions is that the leader will demand that the child or the employee takes responsibility, or that they take accountability, and they themselves, hey, I'm doing my part, right? And they sort of take that responsibility and accountability off their own shoulders. When adult roles share these four things, you get a lot clearer vision, a much clearer vision. You get so much more camaraderie in the way that authority is shared. Leaders take more inspirational approaches and less demanding approaches. How many of you, this is the first time you've learned ego states? Throw a thumbs up in the reactions if this is a little bit new to you. What are your thoughts on this? How many of you are already recognizing a boss that you might have had that was definitely in the parent role to where they were the boss, versus where a true leader takes on those components? See, we've seen it in certain aspects, but this is why I love that, Paul. It is. And it's something we've all seen before and we've all felt before, but this is the why this happens in transactional analysis. So now that we got some pretty thought-provoking and the wheels, they're now a turning, right? And that's the thing, Josh, is we will never work for that person again. That person, that leader actually burns their reputation when it happens. They can't be trusted in those cases anymore. And they have to reestablish trust. And that's very, very hard to do once it's been burned. Lisa, I love that you say that. They don't leave jobs. And a matter of fact, a study by Dale Carnegie has shown that the number one driving factor as to why employees quit is because of their relationship with their immediate leader. That is the number one reason. Number two is belief in senior leadership. And number three is basically pride in working for the company. What we do matters in the greater good. If one of those three things goes away, people will leave. And you're right. And I really like where we're going with this, LaTanya, that you're absolutely right. The team morale goes. There's now fear that goes into play. And that just can't happen anymore. Not in today's workforce. It can't do it. We have to be leaders and not bosses. And the way that we do this is that we share those four things moving forward. Now that we got the wheels turning, let's think about this. What's the difference whenever employees show surface level compliance versus deeper connection to the work they do? And I saw what Lisa, as people are typing in their responses, I love what you said, Lisa, where you said that the quote we've heard is that we love that You demand fear, but you earn respect. If you have to demand anything from your employees, we're not doing it right. Ooh, Smita, I love this. Surface level compliance is they put in discretional effort. What else does it look like? What does it feel like in the workplace? Surface level compliance versus deep connection. Effort is one way, right? Bare minimum effort to stay under the radar is surface level compliance, whereas deep connection, they'll go the extra mile for you. I agree with that. Just Latanya, right? Doing just enough to get by. Lisa says there's deeper connection is more of why behind it. You can go anywhere. Why do you do why here? Why this place? Why do you do what you do here? There's a greater purpose, mission, value into what happens, and that creates a deeper connection. And Anne, spot on is that there's a difference that it looks like work is getting done, but really we're not gaining any ground in the movement. And Nelsita, great point here, that it challenges the status quo. When we have a deeper connection, we're invested in challenging the existing process, not because we're trying to break it, but because we all want to see this better. And Felicia, really love this, to where there's a lack of interest. There's a lack of emphasis in there. There's no motivation. Whereas when you create a deep connection, how many of you have gone the extra mile for a leader? For a leader that you loved? That's not compliance anymore. And Linda, you're right that there's an investment with a deep connection. And Paul, you're right that their deeper connection is doing something because you care. You care about one of three things, or maybe all of these three things. You care about purpose, people, and process. We care about what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. And more importantly, who we do it for. And it's easy to work for those leaders. They breathe that. Now, the first thing that I know that they do, and whether they realize they do it or not, and this is something I want to share with you. So just for these few minutes, I'm just going to ask in this case, if you have a working camera, hop on for a moment. There's going to be a social experiment we're going to do with this. Oh, look at all these people. We like you. Yeah. Look at those smiling faces. See? Notice what's starting to happen right out the gate. Social experiment 1, the moment that people hopped on, how many of you caught other people smile when that happened? That's instant connectivity, FYI. So when people say, hey, I will tell you this, with cameras, one of the first things I do as a leader is I never require cameras, but I always empower and teach people as to why those cameras matter. So I never force anybody to be on camera. But the one thing I love to teach people is that out of what we communicate with another human being, 7% of what we communicate are the actual words being said. 7. 38% is our vocal delivery, and 55% is how we show it, which means 55% is how they see us when we present it. And do you know what's really interesting is even when people are listening right now, how many of you, ready? You see hands on chins. You see pens going to paper. You see notes being taken. You see smiles happening on the camera. So great leaders pay attention to the body language being exhibited by employees, and then they speak life into it. Isn't that neat how that works? You catch that. You catch the smile like, Linda, I saw a head nod there. What are you thinking? And all of a sudden, Linda will perk up and be like, yeah, I like what, and now it's contagious. That energy is contagious. Now, like I said, this was written over 50 years ago by Albert Mehrabian, who was a famous sociolinguistics professor from UCLA. It is more important now than ever in this hybrid workforce. And you can see Kesha, right? and I'm not sure if it's Keisha or Kesha, please correct me if I'm wrong. I really don't like getting names wrong, but you can see the hands right here. That is a key sign of interest, of engagement. Isn't that neat how that works? People are invested in it. And Paul, you're right that there is a pride in the deeper connection. There's a meaning behind it. So that's why whenever I have meetings with people, I'll hop on camera immediately and they're going, oh, wait, let me turn on my camera. And I always say, hey, it's never required, but it is good seeing your face. Because people want to be seen. And some people will say, oh, well, I didn't do my hair or I didn't do my makeup. No worries. No worries. No worries on that. I never have any judgment because I just want to see you, the person behind the camera. That's how I empower people to start hopping on, to start being involved in this. Because, and I teach people this, did you know that out of 100% of what we say, that 55% is how we show it? Any skeptics on this? I always like to ask if there's any skeptics on the room with this. Is that really the case? Ready for this? All right, let's do 2 tests. Number 1, I'm going to turn my camera off for a moment. Now, what if I talk to you like this for the remainder of the hour during my meeting, during this meeting we're having? How many of you immediately felt a slight disconnect? Right? And it's not because I'm this super handsome guy. That's not the case. It's because there's disconnectivity. And now there's a lack to where maybe now I want to multitask. Now I want to shift my attention elsewhere. Now, ready? I'm going to mute myself and type something in the chat. We may as well email, right? We may as well drop that down, and it's not effective at all anymore. What we call this, folks, is upping the bandwidth. This is upping the bandwidth in our communication. Now, that's social experiment number 1. Number 2, how many of you are enjoying what you've learned in the first 20 minutes or so? Pretty cool. See, the beauty of being on camera is you can just go like, and I can see it. That's great, right? That's awesome. Now, ready for this? What if this was the delivery for the next 35 minutes in the way that we communicate, right? Because the content is the content is the content. Bueller, Bueller, Bueller. No. See what happens? Because the words are the words. The words are still the words. But that tone in the way that's being delivered, the energy, and then yes, I'm a hand talker. You can kind of see that. I'm a hand talker, but the animation behind the delivery becomes important. That's the 93% that gets people to draw in. So here's a few things we can do to up the bandwidth to go to the 90%, 93%. And Lisa, Brandon, our marketing guru, will make sure that we have a copy of this. This will be also located on our website once it's complete. So the first thing with this is the vocal delivery, the 38%. There are 5 things that if you ever listen to voice actors or any sort of people that deliver information, there's 5 things that they focus on when they're speaking. Number 1 is tone. Now, tone is not just attitude. I have to make sure I've stressed this. It's not just attitude. It is intonation. Yes, it will. Yep. It'll be all sent out. So intonation is the first thing. I vary my pitch. I vary my pitch and delivery. How many of you like a monotone speaker? I don't think I've ever heard anybody say I love one. So the varying of your intonation is important. Now it takes, once again, that self-awareness and that self-regulation in the way that we communicate. We have to be mindful of it as we're speaking. It takes that interpersonal awareness. The second thing is pace. Varying of pace is a very important thing. There are times where you can get really excited about something and accelerate your pace. And then there's times you got to slow it down to really get people to think about something meaningful. Number 3, and this is by far my favorite, emphasis. And you ready to watch pens go to paper? There is power in the pause. Silence is actually your best friend when communicating. There is power in the pause. How many of you catch people that have the ums, the likes, because they're moving at the speed of light when they communicate? But there's so much power in the pausing. You can draw attention more with pauses. Here's the silent experiment. Ready? How many of you were already wildly uncomfortable? That was 14 seconds. That's it. Silence gives you power. It gives you power. And it does, Anne, right? It truly gives the air of expectation that something's coming. It lends an air of anticipation. Even more than expectation, it's almost like, not that we expect it to be coming, but we wanted it. So emphasis is one of the greatest things you can do in your vocal delivery. Number 4 is volume. I am a typically loud person. I don't know if you could tell that or not. A fairly loud individual. I'm boisterous, I'm jovial, but whenever I really drive a point home, I actually soften my register. I soften, I head tilt, I lean in. I find that I get people to listen more whenever I soften up my register, and people have a tendency to lean in a little bit. So adjusting the variation of your volume is critical. And that doesn't mean always getting louder. It means that if you're typically louder, soften it up. The last one is clarity. And what I mean by clarity is the enunciation. I emphasize key syllables. I pick spots where I want to be really clear in what I'm trying to portray. So in this case, I will make sure I use the exact right words for the exact right moments. As we mentioned, clear is kind. So I try to be as particularly clear as humanly possible. Now that's how we can ramp up to 38%. Is there any one of these, and type in the chat, are there any one of these where you're like, yeah, I need to amp up X? Maybe I got to shift my volume. Maybe it's my pace. Maybe it's the emphasis. Ooh, Smita says tone, variation of the tone. Love that. And love the emphasis. Power in pausing. Tone strategically. Love that, Nelsita. And right, we have a high pitch, so then we have to lower it down. I will tell you, here's the humor of the day. If I don't adjust my tone, I start to sound like Kermit the Frog here. So I'm really conscientious of my tone. Volume. I love that, Paul, right? Right. And so pace, right? Being a New Yorker, we have that pace. Northeasterners, man, we got to watch out on that. I'm coming to you from Pittsburgh, PA, and we are Yinzer speakers. So for us, we have a very ugly accent and it comes at you fast. So we have to be conscious of that. For me, clarity is everything is a Yinzer. We have a terrible accent. So the 55% I want to dive into next is this. If you thought these 5 are important, brace yourselves. Number 1 is eye contact. And what I mean by eye contact, whenever I'm talking about a hybrid world, yes, eye contact when you're face to face is critical. Does anybody notice I'm not looking directly into the camera like this whenever I'm speaking to you? I'm not doing a video recording. I'm talking to people. So the last thing I'm going to do is stare into your soul as we're discussing. The reason why I do this, and this is a positioning tactic, is you are all on my second monitor right underneath my camera, so that whenever I communicate, it just seems natural in the approach with the eye contact. And I'm not watching you to be like, I'm watching you, Tanya. I'm not doing that. I'm really trying to make sure that if I'm communicating with you, are you with me? Are you in with me? That's where that comes in. Or I catch moments of aha moments where I focus. I will tell you, my favorite moment is whenever I say something that seems to be important and people put pen to paper. That's my favorite move, is when they disengage with eye contact to write something down. So eye contact and paying attention to your eye contact and their eye contact is pivotal. Number 2 is facial expression. I certainly know of people that suffer from what we call RBF, also known as resting basic face, right? To where when they listen, it's like, is everything okay? Yeah, totally. It's fine. Yeah, what? Nothing's wrong, right? Mindfulness of our facial expressions is really critical. My wife has a mug that says, please excuse me while I fix my face. Our facial expressions give off so much insight. We've so many muscles in our faces that share insights. That's why I pay attention to smiles, head nods. I pay attention to sort of whenever your eyebrows furrow, when I get you to think about something. Those are all really important. Posture. This one's my favorite, especially in the remote workforce. I position my chair slightly forward in the remote workspace because how many of you are already noticing that it looks like I'm leaning in when I'm talking to you? How many of you do you think that you replicate what I'm displaying? That you are leaning in? That you are comfortable because of it? So I lean in. And then if you speak, I actually sit back and I kind of put my hands here and I kind of listen. So I lean in because the posture shows genuine connection. So posture is critical, even in the remote workforce. Number 4 is gestures. As I mentioned, I'm a hand talker, but I am somebody that I will have a tendency to wildly gesticulate. So what I do is I prop my hands right where my shoulders, right where my seat is, and my hands fit right on the screen. So that way when I'm communicating, everybody's in the same spot. So gesturing is important. Gesturing could look like a head nod, like the lean in head nod. And there's a difference between versus like I'm in. For me, hands give a lot of information. That's why I said, Kesha, and once again, if I'm wrong, please correct me, had the hand on the chin. When I pay attention to hands on chins, that's investment. AJ has it right now. Investment. You can show interest here. Isn't that unique how that works? But if you're reading the room and you can read people, then you know when people are interested. This last one's my favorite. In the workplace, we call it contact, handshakes, right? How many of you love a good firm handshake, right? How many of you are guilty of being the office hugger? We all know they exist. I will travel place and they'll be like, there he is. And then it's just, a hug's coming, right? Now, we can't do that in the remote space, right? We can't do that in the remote space. So what do we do to still create connection? Well, what I do is I actually set up my camera presence around me. I make sure that I am visibly about 24 inches from my camera because I'm not too far, right? I'm not off screen, right? But I'm sitting right in the window. My head's not cut off. I use centering tools. This new Horizons banner isn't just for branding. It's because my shoulders have been between the logo and the S the entire time. I'm centered. And the degrees, great, sure. We all have a few, I'm sure. But guess what? For me, it's really to make sure my head doesn't pop off the screen because I'm a tall guy. So it keeps me centered. That's proxemics. Proxemics means you're making the most of the space in front of you. What's taking up more space, your background or you? Are you centered on camera or are we off? Another thing is your lighting. My lighting, watch what happens with this. This is a cool little trick. I'm going to move my camera for you. Watch what happens if you have lights directly in your background. Brace yourself. Watch what happens in my face. Where'd it go? It creates contrast. So for me, I really focus on having lighting that's behind me, but it's off camera so that my face pops. So is your face showing the dark side of the moon, as Pink Floyd would say, right? Or is it showcasing more of you? Camera presence is so important, especially in the 55%. So what I'm going to teach you is I make the most of what's called the 6 square approach. I want you to imagine that your camera is divided into a 3 by 3, and each section, right, you have 6 squares. Square number 1 should be background. This should be open background here. And I love what's happening. I love that everybody starts to move and this is my favorite part. I love it. This is so fun. Ready? The part here is where it's open. And square 3 is where it's open. That should be background. Some people will put pictures, quotes, something nice, something great there. Love that. Picture 2 should be where your head is. It should be in the second half. Now I know I have a big head, so mine eats up 2 in part of 5, right? I get it. So with that, you want to have something to where it eats up the top half. So your top half should not be where your background is. It should actually be where you are. 4, 5, and 6. 5 should be where your chest is because it actually shows where your posture lives. 5 is where it shows where your posture is. And 4 and 6 down here, this is where you show your hands. What I just love is with the social experiment with the people on camera, you can see so many more people are leaning in, they're centered, and you can see that more of you are coming out of it because of it. Whose mind just went, we never think about these things. Pretty cool. The other part of this, it's sort of our last piece for today, is when, and I know there's a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of interpersonal awareness, a lot of, spatial awareness even. The other thing that I want us to be aware of is anticipating our audience's mindset. This is emotional intelligence, right? We have to be able to read the other. And so whenever I say, well, what does that actually mean when we're demonstrating emotional intelligence? I anticipate my audience's mindset. Now, that doesn't just mean teaching. That means when I'm having meetings with fellow leaders or my employees or other people, I always try to be mindful of that. And so I pay attention to 3 things to keep it as simple as possible. What are their values? What are their interests? And what are their preferences? Values are things that are really important to them as a human being. Do they value purpose or do they value people? Do they value integrity or do they value kindness? What is most important to them? See, for me, I am a mission person through and through, 100%. But I know, and Brandon will laugh that Brandon's boss, her name is Lori. She's amazing in the marketing space. She is people first. So if I try to talk purpose first with her, do you think I'm going to get her buy-in in any case, or I'm going to connect with her on a deeper level? See, Brandon's like, very true. So even though I'm purpose first, I need to shift. I need to learn that and say, you know what? She values this first, so I have to speak there first to then bring her back. And with employees, I do that. So values is the first thing I pay attention to. What do they value? And that's right now, Sid, if we know their style of influence, it really helps tremendously. You all are getting the first sort of knowing of this too. We are going to be partnering with DISC, and we're going to be doing a DISC webinar in August. So brace yourself for that, because we are huge fans of personality, behavioral blends, and things of that nature too. And it is, once we know what matters to them, we can speak a little bit more life to them and communicate the way that they want to be communicated with. The other thing's interests. So with interest, this is another thing. I'm a massive fan of interest. Now, many people, they go to family, and family's their first interest, which is great. Other people, it could be hobbies, travel. It could be all of the above, right? For me, I'm a sports guy. I'm a big sports guy. That's really important to me. Love that, Lisa. Yep. Excellent. Motivation behind things. And there's several other. It's not just this, like there's, PI, predictive index. There's a whole bunch that are out there. The interest is important because you really find out what matters to people. The last one is preferences. Now, this one's a cool one. Ready? Peak times and week times. How many of you hate the 8 a.m. meeting? How many of you prefer the 8 a.m. meeting? That's when you're at your freshest. See, this is the best part. You're watching Ann go like this, and you're watching Lisa go like this. But how mindful are we whenever we try to communicate with our team members? Do we know their peak times and week times? I see one person on here, and her name is Candace. She's an amazing, amazing account executive we have. And I know that if I schedule an 8 a.m. meeting with her, or I try to reach out to her at 8 a.m., she is not at the ready. That is just not her wheelhouse, right? And see, for me, Lisa, Candace, I love Candace. She and I are both Pittsburgh people. So I've known her for so long. And for Candace, I know that she is a later in the day person. But for me, I'm not a later in the day person. So I will always reach out to her around lunchtime, maybe early afternoon, when she's starting to ramp up and I'm starting to weigh down a hair. We have to be mindful of those peak times and week times, folks. I know that I am a true morning person. And I love that, Chandra, you mentioned in your case, after coffee, I'm good to go. So her peak time is around that 10 a.m.er. Once it's 10 a.m., I'm hitting my wind, I'm grooving, I'm ready to roll. Do we know that about our employees? And see, I love that, Lisa, but that's important to know ourselves and then to know the other. I always say, if you really want to get a hold of me, catch me first thing in the morning. But if I need something from you, I'm not reaching out to you at 8 a.m. unless I know that's your peak time. So that's where we have to pay attention to preferences. And this teaches us, folks, right, that we have to walk a mile in their shoes, but we better take off our own shoes first. It's important for us to know ourselves, and then we have to take those shoes off and go to where they are. Mark Goulston calls this going from our here to their there. It's really understanding and knowing ourselves through and through, but then knowing how to shift to meet people where they are. That's how we connect. So the final thing of the day that I'm going to teach you is I'm going to get into understanding a little bit more about the audience buy-in equation. if you really want to test to see, man, am I really getting trust or am I really connecting with my people? Really focus on this for a minute. Really look at the things that matter. And folks, it's a simple equation. How many of you are like, I hate math. Please don't make me math. No shame in the game. This is a very simple equation here. There are 5 indicators that get buy-in from other people. First 3 are on the left, which our goal is to increase as much as possible. And the 2 on the right are to decrease. We have to decrease those things for them. The first one is what is called perceived value. Now, perceived value doesn't mean, do I think it's valuable? It means, do they think it's valuable? So I'll tell you right now, here's a little secret. I'm doing this for you right now. In this case, I'm paying attention and reading the room to see what things you find valuable. And I'm asking you questions on what you've seen to be valuable so far. And we have to listen for it. What do they think is valuable? Do you know how I knew whenever the camera presence was valuable to you? You started making shifts. That's perceived value. See how that works? So we have to determine what do they see as valuable first. Number 2, they have to determine what is credible in you. Why do they believe you're credible? Not why do you believe you're credible? And I'll share this. I've learned this a long time ago. I always thought that I was credible because I did things and led with integrity. Believe it or not, people find me credible because I serve as a subject matter expert. So that's a difference in perceived credibility. Now, it doesn't mean they don't think I'm doing the right thing for the right reasons, but that's not why they rely on me. So perceived credibility is why they believe you are truly reliable and credible. And you have to determine that. And the third one is past data. Now, past data is really more like history. And I'll give an example here. As Candace hopped on the camera, as I mentioned, I've known Candace for a decade. So guess what our history and data is? There's a profound amount. And Brandon, I've known for about, almost a year. And so there's some value there and some history. But for others, you're meeting me for the first time. So we had no data. So we have to build that data with them. Those 3 things have to be increased as much as possible with others to build connections. And in addition, even those 3 things, do not get buy-in all the time. Because ready for this? How many of you today, here's final social experiment. How many of you have enjoyed this session? You found it to be valuable? Seeing head nods, good. All right. How many of you probably say, you know what, this guy's probably credible at this point. I've seen enough credibility. And now we have a foundation of data, right? We have a foundation of data. So how many of you, if I said, all right, this webinar is going to last until 7 p.m. tonight, you guys are still like, I'm in 100%. Look what starts to happen. People are like, or some people are like, well, maybe, I don't know. Here's why. This is the cool part about it, right? And Ann's like, maybe not 7. And this is the purpose of this. I love that you said that, Ann, because number 1, everybody has a cost that they're putting into it. And we have to reduce people's cost. Now, cost isn't always financial. Cost is energy, it's effort, it's time. So the way this looks too is if we have a massive project that people are going to undertake, the chance that they're going to buy into it is going to be pretty slim in the beginning, right? Because it seems overwhelming. So the cost is too great. So we have to chunk it out. We have to break it down so that we're reducing their cost. See how this starts to work? And the last one is risk. And that's people's fears. If you can help alleviate your employees' fears rather than being one of them, you will get so much more connectivity. Fear means reducing fear of the unknown. That's people's greatest fear, is fear of the unknown. People fear what they don't know is ahead of them. That's why when you think leaders are hiding something from you, people start jumping ship. How many of you have seen that? That's why when we said lack of vision, that's a fear. Because we're fear. And the other thing that comes with it, fear number 2, is fear of loss. We fear we're going to lose our job. We fear we're going to lose our stability, our security. We fear we're going to lose. So we have to alleviate their fears. So one thing I do with my team to alleviate their fear is succeed or learn. Failure is removed from the equation. Hey, this class didn't quite go, hopefully. It went well, but it didn't go as well as I would have liked it to. Stop. What would you do different? What'd you learn? It's always my first question. What'd you learn? We remove failure from the equation. We treat it as growth mindset. That's how we alleviate fear. So, what we're going to leave you here with today, and you'll get this after the webinar, is you will have a stakeholder mapping tool. And this is something you get to practice on your own as a thank you for attending. And so you have who your stakeholder is. The stakeholder can be somebody above, below, different department even. Maybe it's a family member. But your goal is to find, what do they value? What are their interests? And what are their preferences? What are their peak times and weak times? Preference could also mean, how do they prefer to communicate? I will tell you, I am not a Teams message person. If you message me on Teams, I am not a fan of it. Email it to me or get a calendar item on my spot. I have 58 people that need something from me. You Teams messaging something just throws a rock in the machine. So no preferences. And then what you do is you look for actions, things you can do to increase your credibility, your value, or data. What are things you can do to beef those up? And the other thing is what can you do to decrease their cost and their risk? And Lisa, I love this example you brought in, is that they're never on Teams and it drives them nuts. Here's the thing. I'm on Teams, but I don't respond right away because I am literally in the middle of probably 2 or other things at that time. But I share my calendar with everybody. And I say my shared calendar is always up to date. You put something on my spot, I don't care if it's 10 minutes or if it's 30 minutes, you get something on those, guess what? You put that on there, you're the only person that will ever exist in the room. So this is the buy-in, folks. This is the buy-in. This is how we can start evaluating, are we really deeply connecting with others? So with that said, for the last couple minutes, final questions that we have. Final thoughts, final concerns. And if we're not sure, so the first thing I always say, this is a great question, is, do you just ask them? The first thing I do is I really pay attention and listen in conversation. Whenever there's casual conversation, I listen deeper. I listen to what's important to them. What do they talk about more than other things? What do they stand for more than anything? Right? And if you're still not getting your answer there, it's okay to transparently ask. And when I mean transparently ask, I'm asking because it matters to me that things matter to you. And I always ask that. It matters to me that it matters to you. So what does matter? But I try to listen first. should the conversation be if the person is talking to you in child mode and if you are the manager? In that case, Smita, this is a great question. What I always say is I go to what's called we language. The way that we shift from parent-child dynamic to adult is that, hey, I want to make sure that moving forward, a lot of the dialogues we have are we-driven dialogues, that it's about us. It's not just about what you and I are going to do. It's about the way we work moving forward. And every dialogue, if they keep pushing back to me versus you, I go back to we. How do we approach this? Every time it's we dialogue moving forward, because we have to share that authority. So it's we. That's a fantastic question. Of course. Anything else, folks? I have a question for you. Do you have a good time? Love this. Well, thank you for attending. I truly appreciate this. I'm going to hand it over to Brandon. Brandon's going to talk to you for a minute or two. And other than that, thank you so much for spending time with me.
Well, thank you so much, Jay. If we can all give a round of applause as a reaction or throw thank yous in the chats. I already see tons of thank yous to Jay. But thank you so much for doing this webinar. I think that it's been very, very beneficial for all of us. As we move forward out of this webinar, you will be able to get a little survey right after you exit asking, would you like to continue the conversation? That essentially means if you want to be able to learn more about how New Horizons can support you in your personal, professional development, we are here for that. People like Candace on the sales team are able to work with you to be able to find how we can best support you in what your needs are. So if you say yes to that question, we'll go ahead and get you connected with the right people to be able to have that conversation. We do have another webinar that's a part of, I don't want to necessarily say it's a series, but we do have another webinar next week on emotional intelligence. So if you're interested in joining that webinar, you can register for it in the same place that you registered for this one. And like Jay said, in a couple months, we'll have webinars on DISC. So we continue to put out new webinars as they come up, and we are continuing to work on finding the best topics for all of you. So if you are interested, please continue to join our webinars and say yes to that question in the survey. But thank you all so much for coming today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.